So welcome. Thank you guys for joining me today. My name is Dr. B. Some people know me as B, some as Dr. B. And I wanted to get on this call today to offer you guys something because in the beginning, about a year ago, if you can imagine this, we've been in this strange quarantine experience for over a year now. And it has taken its toll. It started taking its toll from the outset, but it's continued to take its toll on people, on relationships, on all sorts of things. And as the cage rattler that I am, I wanted to be able to offer something to my clients and to people that I know to be able to help you ease back into this new normal. That's kind of the version 2 of this new normal. It's out of quarantine, I hope soon, but back into relationships and experiences. And you've probably accumulated, unfortunately, some baggage, whether that be the COVID-19 or just some mental baggage. You might have accumulated a few things along the way. So I wanted to be able to give you some tips and tricks and a framework for understanding how to deal with some of these challenges. So a couple of disclaimers up front. One, I have this little beeper for my dog. If she starts barking and I get distracted, it's because I'm going to try to quiet her down so we can continue, right? This is one of the norms that we've come to understand in Zoom life, is that we have children and Amazon delivery people and dogs and cats walking across screens. So me, I've been working from home for 20 years and I haven't been on a lot of Zoom calls for exactly that reason, because I know about these distractions. So I just wanted to give that one disclaimer. Number two, you may see me grabbing a drink off camera, and I just want to let you know, you guys are entitled also to do the same. Please take care of yourselves as we're on this call, because this call is a lot about self-care and support. So with no further ado, I'm going to get started. So we're already recording, which is exciting. So what brings you here? Like, why do we know that this is happening, that why we are having struggles in this time of the pandemic? Well, the things that I've been seeing since the pandemic started all can be summed up in one word: grief. No matter what things have happened to us over the course of the last year, we have all faced some level of grief. We've faced it perhaps with losing loved ones, or maybe just losing time and experiences with loved ones. Maybe milestones that we thought we were going to celebrate in a certain way, we haven't been able to do that. Maybe we've had things thwarted in our own careers. We were about to start a new job, and then there were budget cutbacks as a result of the pandemic. There are so many ways in which our grief has shown up. And that grief takes on many, many different forms, depending on who you are, where you come from, what the experience is, what your coping skills are, all sorts of diversity in this. But it can look like stress, frustration, depression, anxiety, impatience, lethargy, all sorts of things. So I just want to pay attention to that for a moment, because the reason why we're here is to try to pull some of those things out, tease those things out, face those things, what I call looking at the monster under the bed, so we can address a new way of understanding and dealing with those things. So I guess I have to start with my story as to, Thomas Edison probably invented the light bulb because he wanted to read after dark. Well, I created this framework because I was trying to deal with something in my own life. As most of you know, about 2.5 years ago, I was literally hit by a truck. So I was riding home, actually, wasn't even driving home from dinner. And an Uber driver plowed through the intersection that we were going through, flipped us on our roof, and sent us across the street and up onto the curb. During the course of that, as many of you also know, I suffered a traumatic brain injury. For a while, doctors thought, oh, she's going to get better. It's only a few days. She'll feel much better in a few days. And they told me that. And after a few months, they did the same. And after 6 months, they said, well, most people get better by 6 months. You should be better soon. By a year, everyone put up their hands and said, I don't know what else to do for you. They kept sending me to new specialists and doctors and things, but nothing ever got better. I can tell you that how I felt that moment of the accident, dizzy, nauseous, the loud ringing in my ears, the feeling of just not being in the environment I'm in, have survived and persisted every moment of every day since. So in order to be able to come to the world in a way that pays honor to the fact that I made it through that accident, again, luck of the Irish, I had just gotten back from a trip to Ireland, for those of you who didn't know, is that I had to think of a new construct, a new way of relating to myself so that I could both understand what I was going through, but also push myself forward. Because any of you who have known me for any period of time, one of my nicknames has been the Energizer Bunny. You know, my MO used to be like moving through life like one of the superheroes on a Marvel movie screen. And now I'm more like the English patient, right? So everything has changed. My cadence has changed. So what did I do? What was the framework that I came up with? Well, the framework I came up with was this essential two-part, and here's a tool, and this is something you may want to write down, is a two-part approach to anything, any frustration you're having, a fight you're having, a sensation you're experiencing, anything, any change you're trying to make, whatever it is that is causing you any level of discomfort, there is a compelling balance that you have to strike in order to give and get your best out of that moment and experience. And it's this: compassion and accountability. You have to hold both of those things simultaneously all the time in balance: compassion and accountability. So how did I know that that was a problem for me? How did I know that compassion and accountability was the framework that I needed to follow? Well, too much compassion, so being imbalanced and having too much compassion, looks like laying in my bed, watching Netflix and doing the woe is me routine over and over and over again, and never feeling any better, and certainly having a cost to my mental health that I was not producing or experiencing any of the things that I had before. The flip side to having too much accountability is run, 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 go, 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 push past your limits, just keep going, suck it up. In the head injury circles, they call that the push crash cycle, which is pushing, pushing, pushing towards something until you crash. And I found pretty quickly in trying to recover from my brain injury that I needed to balance those two things. I needed to stop for a moment, and I needed to balance how I was feeling and acknowledging that with how I needed to keep moving. So what else does it look like when you're out of balance? So I have a number of examples, and you can probably think of some yourself. But a lot of people, they always have, come to me with their problems, whether they be clients or friends, and they tell me the things that they're struggling with. And I have so much compassion on my side for the things that they're going through, and also trying to hold them accountable. But when I see that they're out of balance, I see a few things. I see a powerlessness that they feel when they're too much in compassion. And assume too much, out of compassion, right? In compassion. So they're feeling, I got distracted by letting someone into the room. That when they are feeling sorry for themselves and powerless, they're thinking, woe is me. This is always the way it's going to be. Of course I feel like this. This is awful. This is terrible. There's nothing I can do. When they are feeling too responsible, too much accountability, they think that they can push through anything and anyone. They're in perfection mode. They think that nothing can stand in their way. It doesn't matter if they have an illness or an injury or something devastating has just happened to them. They can do this. They can push through this without any regard for how they got there and how they feel in that moment. So what do you do? What's the framework around compassion and accountability? Well, first of all, it's looking at really two easy catch phrases. Super, super easy. One of them is, of course. Compassion requires that we think about things in an of course mindset. Of course I feel badly. Of course this is uncomfortable. Of course I'm upset about this. Of course this stinks. Of course I'm sad, I'm mad, I'm whatever that emotion is. Of course. You got here as a natural consequence of every experience and decision you had to this point. So if wherever you are, however you're feeling, whatever you're facing, it's of course you're feeling like that based on, again, your framework and your experiences and your choices. So of course. So for me, in my brain injury, of course I didn't want to get out of bed. Of course I was scared of what tomorrow was going to bring. Of course everything made me feel sick and unmotivated to do anything more. Of course, of course, of course. But if I stopped there, that's exactly what I'd have, is just that moment repeated like Groundhog Day over and over and over again. And we find it a lot in this pandemic. People are sitting around. I can't tell you how many people I've heard and seen have picked up eating, drinking, and social media addiction problems, right? Because of course I'm going to drink more because there's nothing else to do. Of course I'm going to eat more because I'm bored out of my skull. Of course I'm going to do these other things that are distracting to me because this pandemic stinks. Yeah, that's true. And of course, those would be some of the things that you would entertain as options for dealing with all those feelings you're having around the grief and the trauma of going through a pandemic. However, I'm a cage rattler and I won't let you stop there. And that's what this is about, is the flip side of that, which is accountability. So if of course represents the compassion side of things, what represents the accountability side? Now what? That's what it does. It's now what. So if I say, of course I feel this way, I have to pair it with now what. So if of course you took to those coping mechanisms and practices, of course, well, now what? Because if you keep doing today what you did yesterday and the day before that and the day before that and the day before that, guess what you're going to have tomorrow? The very same thing. So if you want something to change, if you want to have a different experience, a different outlook, different relationships, whatever it is, you have to stop yourself from sitting in, of course, perpetually. You have to move into now what? Now what? Now what am I going to do? So pairing those two is essential. So what are some examples? And I might ask you guys if you want to contribute to this at all, of things that you found that have been super helpful. And also, by the way, if this is stirring some things in you and you've got some personal stories, we're going to have time at the end. If anybody's ever coached or met with me, I never push meetings right to the end of the time. So we'll have plenty of time toward the end of my talk period for you to share any stories or questions or curiosities that you have. So if you have one, you need to work up your nerve to get on camera to do that. Start working on that now. So what does self-care and what does accountability look like? Well, self-care can take a lot of forms. I mean, sure, it includes bubble baths and pedicures and manicures and, that sort of thing. But it's also about simply noticing how you're feeling and starting with empathy for yourself. For those of us who have had a younger sibling or family member or child, when they come to us and they are sad or scared or mad, upset about something, hopefully where we start is compassion for their trouble, is looking at them and thinking, oh, that really stinks. And we can start there with ourselves. So when we say, of course, it's kind of followed up with, that stinks. That really stinks that that's what's happening to me right now. Like, this is not what I planned. This is not what I wanted. I don't want to be here. This is ugly and uncomfortable. This is bad. I don't like it, right? It's simply to acknowledge what is happening in the moment. That's the first big piece of self-care, is that acknowledgement of that. But it can also take some other forms, which is going gentle with yourself, not seeking perfection, not thinking that you have to move just as soon as you've acknowledged that you feel a certain way. It might mean, do I need an hour? Do I need to take an afternoon? Do I need a day? Asking yourself the question of, how can I best take care of myself right now? Because you, my friends, are the ones responsible for taking care of you. Sure, you might have the responsibility of taking care of other people. But as the flight attendants on the flights I started flying when I was a very, very young child used to hammer into us, that when those oxygen masks drop down, your job first is to put it on yourself before you try to help anyone else. So for those of us who have lulled ourselves into these experiences of always having to take care of others and basing our identity on how well we do so, we need to remember that part of self-care, part of caring for others, a critical part of caring for others is caring for ourselves first, putting on that oxygen mask in whatever way that seems to fit for you. And part of caring for yourself is also respecting yourself, respecting the potential that you have, the opportunities that you have in front of you, the gifts that you have to bring, which leads into accountability. Because self-care overindulged is no longer care, if you think about it. It's caring at the beginning, but then when it hits overindulgence, that's not caring for someone. It's kind of like if you have a child and you do every last thing for them because you say you care. So I care for them. So I tie their shoes, I make their bed, I do their laundry, I do every last thing for them. In the end, that's not really caring for them in a holistic way, because what you've done is you haven't allowed for them to create some sense of self-confidence to be able to take care of themselves. And the same thing goes for caring for people in your life. Don't mistake caring for other people and giving yourself to their needs as being the only way that you can show caring. Sometimes it's by taking in that next step with them too, which is holding them accountable for being able to do things for themselves. Because if you don't do that, you are actually, in a sense, showing disrespect and dishonor when you do that with others. And the same goes for yourself. Not holding yourself accountable to your capacity is not a way of just sitting in care. It's really about respect. You got to get to respect. So when you move into accountability, there's lots of ways to do this. Now, of course, you can hire a coach like me. That was a shameless plug. I know, terrible, right? But you can hire a coach like me. You can gather with others who are on the same path. One of the reasons why Weight Watchers has been so successful over the many years it's been in business is because it recognizes that we require community to succeed. We need people to hold us accountable. We need accountability partners. We need structure. We need feedback. We need acknowledgement. So when you're trying to hold yourself accountable, one of the key ways of doing that is finding a partner or partners or group that will help you and help hold you accountable. I just joined a book club group, and part of that is just about remembering to connect with people again. Like that's a way of holding yourself accountable. Is, okay, so what small steps can I take to start to actually venture back out into the world? Because it's about to open back up, right? So part of it is asking for help, reaching out to other people, getting support from others. The other is this sense of rewarding and recognizing yourself when you do something that's good. So for me, I have this board now in my room that has the lists of all the different physical and mental exercises I'm supposed to do to try to keep myself at least steady in my brain injury, if not make improvements. Okay. So I have that every day. I look at that. And there's a sense of recognition when I can see that all of the things on that board I've completed. That's super encouraging for me. And part of the reward for that too is me honestly giving myself a "you go girl" at the end of that. If I make it through my morning and I did the things on that list, I'm super excited about that. And I don't mind patting myself on the back. That's why my arm reaches back here, by the way. I don't know if you know this, but the reason your arm reaches back here is so that you can indeed pat yourself on the back. So you do that. Okay. So you have to recognize that we are motivated by that sense of validation. For anybody who's read my first book, Feed the Need, you know that we have 4 core needs as human beings. One of them is validation. We need that. We need validation from ourselves and we need validation from our others, which returns me back to why you'd want to be in a community or have a coach or a partner in this, because they can offer some of that validation that you're working on, whatever it is that you're working on, whatever that challenge is. Okay. Reaching out to others, it allows you to not kind of close in on yourself and keep telling yourself the same story over and over too, because if you have good friends, they're going to call you out on your BS. They're going to hold you accountable for the things that you promised to do. They're going to tell you when you're telling yourself a BS story that's not moving you forward at all. So that can really, really help. So those are some ideas about holding yourself accountable. Having, different things work for different people. Some people like to do sheets and graphs and things like that. And other people like to journal or what have you. Is there anybody on the call who wants to offer one of their self-care or accountability tricks and tips? You can go ahead and just take yourself off mute if you'd like to. Anyone courageous enough while I take a sip?
Something that I've been doing, I live in an apartment with 4 other people and I'm in college, so it's a pretty small, like tight apartment. So I've had the different experience of having, I think during COVID, a lot of people are feeling really alone. And I've been in a house or an apartment with 4 other people this whole time, is taking some of that time back for myself where I can just be alone, because then if I am alone in my room, I'm on classes, I'm on Zoom calls or whatever it may be. So I like to take walks in the evening just for like an hour, 30 minutes, 5 minutes, if that's all I have time for, and just walk by myself to give myself that time just to think and not be in a house with other people or on Zoom calls or just on. It's just a feeling where you can just walk and do nothing, have no agenda, and just think.
Right. I love that. And I love that you actually brought that up, because one of the misnomers about this pandemic is that everyone is going through the same thing. We are all going through the same thing very, very differently. So like to your point, some of us people are on top of us all the time because we're stuck in houses now with family members or roommates or spouses that we never had to see before. We're like, get out of my sight. Like, why are you still here? Looking around like, could you take it in another room? Like, I know I wanted more time together, but this is getting ridiculous. And then other people are completely isolated and feel lonely. They're like, I was an introvert, but this is crazy. Like, this is even beyond what an introvert ever wanted. This is like Ted Kaczynski introvert level, games here. So we need to pull back off the throttle here. So I think that we need to also recognize when we think about that self-compassion is that your experience may be very different from someone else's. So your coping strategies, your self-care measures may also look very different from other people's. Like everybody, Bella, might say at the end of this pandemic, like, everybody, let's get together. And you might be like, no, let's not. Like, no, you guys go out and do your thing. I'm going to have the house to myself. And that's okay. That's perfectly, it's beyond okay. It's desirable for you to speak to that need and to be able to lean into that, because it looks different for everyone. Anybody else have an accountability or a self-care thing that they want to add for the good of the group? There's lots of people on here who could benefit from you.
Hey, Dr. B, it's Katie Larson.
Hi, Katie.
Hello. One of the things that I've been doing is a trick that I learned from you. Years ago, you were talking about, learning to stay in the present. And one of those ways is to wiggle your toes. And why that has helped me with self-care is it brings me back to my own reality. So I feel like over this past year, like my head is all over the place, work, home, whatever. And then I have all these like actual physical distractions and animals and humans running through my house. So every once in a while, like I wiggle my toes to say, okay, this is me. This is what's around me right now. What do I need right now?
Right.
So I think just that mindfulness and presence and the toe wiggling trick you've taught me. I love
that. And I love that I didn't even give her a lean in to where I was going next in this presentation, but she kicked it off. So thank you, Katie. Like, it's great to have a plant in the audience. Who knew, right? But before I move into that, does anybody have any other things? How about accountability? I haven't heard anybody say anything about accountability, how they hold themselves accountable. in a
Hey,
healthy way.
everybody.
What's up?
I said, hey, I'll do that one.
Please.
Hey, my name is Sherry. Sorry, I look kind of foolish, everyone. I'm a dance teacher and it's a theme day today for St. Patty's Day. I wanted to say that I like to hold myself accountable by writing lists. And my strategy is to take everything I need to do in my life and write it all down. And some things it's really small, like empty the dishwasher.
Right.
And then sometimes it's really huge, like an enormous project that needs to be done. And I hold myself accountable because I take such great joy in crossing them off my list that I really, really get it done. And in terms of self-care added to that, I will add in take a walk, because sometimes you feel so burdened by your actual tasks that you don't take that moment for things you need for yourself. So I feel the need to cross everything off the list. So if it's take the walk is on it, then I'm taking the walk.
I love that. I love that you put in this balance of accountability with self-care. And for some of us, for us, you know, like I'm a reacher and a stretcher. I love to get things done. That part of my self-care is actually completing the list, right? It's one of the ways, and especially for me, and again, you know, my journey is that I have felt so at times so useless because my struggles with my, you know, brain injury and my lethargy and all of the things that come along with that injury, like I'm just not doing a lot of things. So part of my self-care is looking at a list of things and actually seeing that I got it done and being jazzed that I actually completed something. So it can look like that too. It's really about knowing yourself and kind of getting a sense of what that looks like for you. Anybody else want to add any more before I move to my next big piece about this? Anyone?
Yeah, I've got something. It's kind of a fail, actually.
Okay.
I had a COVID shot on Monday, and by Monday night, I was really fatigued.
Yeah.
So when I got up Tuesday morning, I said, I'm going to call it sick today, which I never do. I don't use sick days.
Right.
But because we're working at home, I still ended up doing 2 Zoom meetings and an hour-long phone call for work. And so holding ourselves accountable should also mean if we take a day where we're not going to work, that we should force ourselves to really take the day. And that was a absolute failure on my part. And I own it, and I try to do better next time, but it's a challenge.
I love that you actually said that. And I want to build on that for a minute, Nick, because that's part of this accountability and self-care balance is when you say, of course, and you say what next, right? Like, what else can I do? You have to also understand that there's this sense of, I have to give myself permission to fail. I have to give myself permission to stumble. I have to give myself permission to be imperfect. That's part of the game here, folks. Like no one, by the way, anybody who comes to me and says, I have a problem, I want to be perfect. There's a delusion that exists. It doesn't exist. There is no perfect. Your best, we can work on that. You can work on doing your best, but perfect, it's not even, it can't even be a standard because it's impossible to reach. There is no such thing. There is no example of perfection in this world. So you have to look at it as being the best that you can be. And taking care of yourself means allowing for that, like, oops, my bad, better luck next time. Maybe I'll do better tomorrow, right? So as many times as I've pushed myself over that push crash cycle, because it's super easy to do. By the way, I have to give a shout out to my physical therapist. For those of you who hadn't seen this post, I was in physical therapy and he called me a delicate flower. And for those of you who know me, the idea of calling me a delicate flower is the most ridiculous thing, but that's actually how I am. So part of this compassion and accountability piece is holding myself accountable to having recovery in a way that fits me, not in a way that necessarily I would like to have, right? And so allowing for that imperfection and that sense of humanness that we all have. So that's really super important. Well, thanks guys. Anything else before I move on? You guys are a fun group. Okay. So behind all of this, like, so why would people struggle with balancing accountability with compassion? And you say, oh, I don't know how that could be true. You've made it seem so easy. I'm just going to go do these lists. I'm going to make that happen. I can't tell you. I mean, I've done a lot of coaching over the last 15, 20 years. And I can tell you that it is one of the most common struggles. Why? Why is that, B? It's that way because of the stories that we've been telling ourselves. And for anybody who has already read Pain Rebel, you know how I talk about contracts. And I'm not going to do a full contracts workshop here today. You can reach out to me for more information or pick up a copy of Pain Rebel. Like I said, you can get one free today. But we talk about contracts because it's the framework through which we see the world. So if we see that not doing 110% every day, if our view about that is that that means we're weak or broken or bad or wrong, then we're going to have a really, really hard time having healthy accountability and sitting in self-compassion. Similarly, if we have signed contracts early on, have a framework of the world that when bad things happen, that's it. You know, the world stinks, the world's against us, this is going to be awful, that you have this, you know, Eeyore kind of mentality that pops up when stuff hits you, then it's going to be really easy to jump into self-compassion and not be able to get yourself out. So it really starts with the narrative. It starts with the way that you're telling yourself the story about how you got here and how you might be able to get out. And that is changeable. It's not easy, but it's changeable. We have to examine, and for anyone who's ever taken a class with me, I have a few students here on the call, they're going to love this, but the mantra that I have been pounding into people's heads for years is awareness equals choice and choice equals power. So if you have awareness about what it is that you're doing, you have more choices. And with more choices comes more power, not power over, but power from within. So in order to examine the narrative that you've been building that has made having this balance of compassion and accountability a good balance, you need to examine how you came to this moment. What kind of stories are you telling yourself? What are you saying that's making that seem like it's the right thing to do, like it's how you have to be? Now, for me, growing up, the only way that I got through a lot of the things that I got through was to just keep pushing, just keep going. And in order to manage now this brain injury, I had to come to terms with the fact that that old way of being no longer fit my current circumstances. So I was going to need to shift that model. And sometimes I was just going to need to sit. I was just going to need to take in the world from a resting position because there wasn't anything I could do in that moment. And that needed to be okay. So how does that work with a narrative overall? So I think I tell people this to kind of frame their thinking and their narrative in a way that serves them. So there are three main roles that when you read any book or watch any movie, there is a villain, a victim, and a hero, right? Kind of main characters in any plot. In your story, what are you? Most of us would never say, well, I'm the villain, right? We've got plenty of those out there, you know, whether they're in politics, entertainment, or in our backyard, we have our villains. We've sketched them out. Might be a coworker, might be a boss, might be a former spouse, who knows? But we've got our villains all set up. So then where are the other two? How about victim? Oh, most of us don't want to think of ourselves as victim. But how many times have we found ourselves telling a story that makes us sound like we have no idea how we got there and we have no idea how we're going to get out? Being honest with ourselves about that, facing that truth about ourselves, that it is so easy to slip into that woe is me space, is an honest way of getting more awareness about, oh, there I go again. I'm doing that victim thing again, and that's not going to serve me. So I think we'd all agree that we'd want to be the hero in our own story. We'd want to be the person who prevails. We'd want to be the person who gets it right more than we get it wrong, that is conquering things when they're thrown in front of us. And not in a, again, perfect sort of way, but in a, I get knocked down, I rise up. Maya Angelou is one of my favorite poets. Well, up until the time that we got the poet laureate on inauguration day. Anyway, but she talks about still I rise. So if you are thinking about yourself as a hero, I want you to think about yourself in that way of it's about rising every time you get knocked down. What I found, however, with people when they're trying to rewrite their stories and they're trying to get to the point of being able to be the hero in their own story, I find that they have to take a different role first. Now, Katie Larson, thank you. You gave me the kickoff to this one because it's super, super important. But they have to be the narrator first. They have to be able to look at, like, observe, because that's what a narrator does. A narrator observes what's going on and calls to the audience or reader's attention the things that it sees that are happening in the context of the story. In that same way, you get to be the narrator, the observer in your own life. That's where the awareness comes in. So instead of being locked into, I'm going to be the hero, I'm always going to be the hero, am I being the hero, I'm going to be the hero, we have to think, I want to be the hero, so I need to notice what it is that I'm doing that seems heroic, what it is that I'm doing that seems to be victim-led, and what am I doing that might actually put me in the villain role today. So we have to be observer first, and that takes awareness and noticing. So to Katie Larson's point, thank you very much. We have to be present. One of the things that is the hardest thing to do when you are going through any kind of trauma or struggle, and I can speak from experience with this, and many of us on this call can, the hardest thing that we can be asked to do is to be in the present. Because the present is where all the trouble seems to be. However, as we recover through those traumas, as we figure out how to get our footing back on solid ground, we recognize that the only place our power is directly in the present. So when I talk to people about creating more awareness in their lives, of owning their story in a more powerful way, what I instruct them to do is to be really aware of time zones. What do I mean about time zones? Do I mean the spring forward that we just did? Absolutely not. What I mean by time zones is that we exist in 3 time zones. We exist in the past, we exist in the present, and we exist in the future. Well, that's crazy talk, Dr. B, because how can we exist in the past or the future? Well, if you've ever talked to anyone who is filled with shame, regret, or is caught up in some sort of depressive, frustrated, saddened, powerless moment, they are usually existing in the past. If you find someone who is filled with anxiety and fear and dread and worry, they are existing in the future. The way that you hold on to your power, the way that you change your story, the way that you demonstrate compassion and accountability, the way that you connect better with others, the way that you do just about anything purposeful and beautiful in this life is by being present, by being in this moment. Now, I'm going to make a movie reference that no one ever makes because it's the one Will Smith movie that everyone, I think, wants to forget he ever made, which is After Earth. But there is a beautiful moment in After Earth when Will Smith says to his actual real life son in the movie, he says that fear is an illusion because it happens in a future state that you have not reached yet. There is nothing to fear in the moment you are in. There is only action to take. Now I'm paraphrasing because I can't recall his exact wording in that, but look it up. Don't watch the rest of the movie because it's awful. But there is that great scene. And it tells us that we need to be in this moment. So one of the ways, as Katie said, is to wiggle our toes. We can practice taking deep breaths. We can log on and grab an app on the App Store, Breathe or Headspace or Calm, or any other kind of meditative app that reminds us to be present in our body first and our mind second. We always think like, oh, I can be present in my mind because I'm thinking about the things that I have to do and I'm recalling things. Well, that's part of it, but so much of it has to do with our body, because if you think about it, when I said that we have 3 time zones we can exist in: past, present, and future. Unless you've figured out some Star Trek adaptation, none of us can move our bodies back to the past or our bodies forward to the future. But we can do that with our minds all the time. So the body is the key to having that present experience, being in the present moment, which is why I talk about people wiggling their toes, taking a breath, rubbing their forefinger with their thumb. Sometimes I talk about the power of the penny, of sticking a penny in between those 2 fingers and feeling the curves and contours on Abraham Lincoln's face and the Lincoln Memorial, but getting a sense of being right there, because it's very difficult to concentrate that strongly on something that's happening in your own body and also be distracted by some thought that is errant and not helpful to you being in the present moment. So in order to show, oh, Mary Chapin Carpenter, I love all these comments that are coming up that you guys are getting to read more of than I will, but I'm going to be excited to see them. There's fast, slow and stall, no reverse. You got that right. So there's a lot to be said for holding yourself in the present when we talk about compassion and accountability. How? Because compassion, to be true and real and intense and powerful, you have to tap into how that feels in this moment, where you are in this moment, really checking in. Where is this experience showing up in my body? Is it a tightness in my neck? Is it a clenching of my fist? Like, where am I in this? That requires being in the present. The same thing holds true for accountability. If I'm having a really bad symptom day, worse than normal because I had to do something like this today, or I teach a class, then I need to actually check in with my body before I go and hold myself accountable to complete the stuff on that beautiful list I drafted. Because the best form of self-care and accountability, maybe, as Nick was saying, maybe taking that day off, taking that time and actually not laying on the couch eating bonbons, watching Netflix reruns, but simply saying, I need to pause, because this is the way that I hold myself accountable for my recovery and bringing my best self to the world, is by taking that moment and time out. Okay. So I have moved through, I think, all of my big rock stuff, but as people have ever noticed about me is that when I'm done presenting and then someone throws a question to me, I sometimes come up with something else that's brilliant. So if you'd like to test that theory and see if there's anything else that I didn't say that you needed to hear, you can test my brilliance and my ability to throw something helpful out to you now and ask me a question and see what I say. And maybe there'll be something for you and something for someone else on the call. So anyone have like a personal frustration story, like person that's driving them insane and you're trying to figure out how to apply compassion and accountability to that? Maybe it's a boss. I don't know. Maybe you got divorced over COVID. I don't know, but there could be anything that's going on in your life that I might be able to be helpful with. So you've got me for free for another 13 minutes, although I'm going to end a couple of minutes early to make sure people have time to transition to their next thing, but you've got a few minutes with me. Hit me. I'm going to play the Jeopardy music. Really? No one has anything?
It's Katie. I have something. I just couldn't come off mute.
Okay.
The compassion part of it.
Yes.
I think something, this is my opinion, that's been hard during this past year is that compassion. Even if you're a very compassionate person, I feel like we've all been in this race for like who has it worse.
Right.
And that's, not just COVID, but, everywhere. It's like the game, the like one upper game and,
right.
So yeah, just anything, any wise words that you have for us that we can take forward with the whole, kind of. trying to find that compassion, I don't know, just without feeling angry about it.
I love it. So I actually just had someone reach out to me last night, struggling hard with something that sounded very similar, very protracted conflict that was going on. And the person on the other end of the conflict is behaving in a way that this person is so frustrated with because they're acting entitled and, just taking advantage at every turn, being not the person that this person would want them to be. And there's really just 3 words that you can say to yourself when you find yourself comparing or judging or getting angry about whatever it is that someone else is doing that doesn't fit. Not my journey. Not my journey. Not my journey. Now, for those of you who know the area where I live in Glastonbury, Connecticut. And Glastonbury, Connecticut is it's not quite Beverly Hills 90210, but there's a little of that vibe going on, just a little, right? There's a lot of, people who go on, vacations to the Swiss Alps because they felt like it one weekend, right? And they go to school with my children. Okay. So there are lots of people who are on very different journeys than one another, just in a very close proximity. We have Section 8 housing and we have mansions in the same town, going to school together, competing for the same resources, on the same sports teams, right? So there's a lot of looking over and seeing what somebody else has or somebody else is doing or how someone's behaving. And we want to judge them into some sort of change. And as I asked my friend last night who reached out to me with her struggle was, how much has your judgment and anger and frustration changed their behavior? Big goose egg. Not at all. But you know what it did? It invested your energy, her energy, in a fool's errand. Right? So all of that energy, imagine, like I say about those hackers that come in and send you crazy emails and try to get you to give your PIN number and all that stuff. If all those people could come together and use that brilliance, we could solve world hunger, cancer, all sorts of things, because they're ingenious. They're hardworking. They really have a high level game. It's just directed in the wrong way. Same thing when you get caught up in resenting, envying, and judging other people. It's not about whether or not you're right. I'm sure you are. I'm sure they're awful. I'm sure they're terrible. I'm sure I would love to see them, dragged through the streets. But guess what? All of that energy that you are expending doing that, you're losing that energy for other pursuits. And I want better for you. So every time you start to consider that for someone else, not my journey, and maybe even imagine yourself handing over the very limited energy and oxygen that we have in any given day. Now, for me, after suffering this brain injury, I have my bandwidth is like this. So my ability to give, excuse my language, fucks has reduced down to almost nothing. Because I don't have the energy or the time or the motivation or any of it for that. So I don't want you to get a brain injury in order for you to experience this joy, but I want you to do the practice anyway. Thank you for that. I love that one. Anybody else?
I have a question. This is Lynn Zimmer, and I actually work with Katie, but
Lynn.
I don't think we knew each other were on this. Hi. You touched on the fact that everybody's COVID circumstance is different, right? Some people are completely isolated and alone, and other people are not so alone. Right. I am one of those not so alone people that has been home for a year, husband working from home, I'm working from home, children schooling from home. So the struggle comes with the compassion and the capacity to continue to have compassion when you're on your last nerve, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
And what do you have in the toolkit?
So are you thinking for the people who are in your home that are driving you insane?
Yes, those
Okay.
people.
Yeah, those people. Yeah, those people. So I think the compassion, it actually has to start with you. What I notice people like to do when I talk about self-compassion and compassion is they're like, oh, let me have compassion for others. But they haven't always really dived into how they need to have compassion for themselves, how they need to say, like, of course I want to like scream through the house and tell everyone to shut up and leave, right? Of course, like we were not designed for this. We were not designed for isolation, and we were not designed for 24/7 companionship. Like that just isn't the truth. That's just not how we were designed. I mean, even in the early stages, people went out and hunted, and people went out and gathered. They went out, they left. We have not been able to leave. So I think we have to start with your self-compassion, that of course, I don't like these people right now. This does not make me a bad person. This is a natural space that I would be in, given the decisions I've made and the experiences I've had to this point, right? And then imagine the same for them. Help them, because sometimes what happens is when we're bubbling over, we get more annoying and more toxic to the people around us. It's one of the things I talk about in Pain Rebel, is that if we don't clear up our own stuff, we hand it over to other people. So I think part of the self-compassion piece and trying to extend that compassion to others is helping the people we care about to practice good self-compassion themselves. Because the more that they do that, the more compassionate they will be, and the easier it will be to coexist with one another, because we'll all be playing from the same playbook. Is that helpful at all,
Good
Lynn?
advice. It is actually, and I tend to fall in the balance category as
Yeah.
out of balance to the side of accountability.
Right.
Right. So the whole idea of self-compassion would bring me more into balance.
Absolutely. And I like soul sister right here, because before the brain injury, you could ask anyone who knew me. I was like, oh yeah, I feel badly, but it's okay. I'm going to keep going. I'm just going to keep going. Just get out of my way, you know? And now that I've been in this space, I'm like, oh, this is what I really was talking about when I told people to be compassionate about themselves. Like, way to hit me right between the eyes, life. That was super helpful. Yeah, that was good. It was real good. That was a great question. I'll take one more question, but then I want to make sure I let people go a couple minutes beforehand. And I'm gonna recap with my kind of like 3 things that I want you to leave with. Okay. So one more question. Any got one?
Hey, Bridget, it's Ryan.
Hello, Ryan.
Hello. So I'm actually building a leadership program right now. And a new section that I've been building out is actually around managing your energy, especially after this year. But I also know that a lot of my leaders are going to come back to me and say, like, okay, I know you're telling me to like set a boundary or like take a day off, but what do I say when they're like, but I don't think that my leader will value me taking a day off. Like or they just say, I can't do it. I don't have time. And then they're running around in circles, basically.
Yeah. And I think that's part of recognizing what is the end point. Like we talk about when, anybody who sails ships or, boats or anything else recognizes that you have to know where you're heading in order to get there, right? Like you go on a vacation, you have to know where you're going in order to get there. So if their North Star, their docking point is the most productive, the most resourceful, the most effective, well, what's the road to get there? They might be thinking that the only road to get there is to just keep driving at whatever pace it is until they actually just drop dead, right? But that's actually not the best way. So maybe it's about recognizing the research that is out there, the abundant research that is out there that says that if we don't take those days of rest, if we don't take those opportunities for self-care, if we don't pay attention to our health, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual health, that we won't be able to bring the best of ourselves to those moments. So it's really challenging that narrative again, that the only way to be successful is to work 90 hours a week and never take a break. And it's challenging that narrative, that if they can start telling themselves a different story, they won't feel like a failure following your advice. People feel like failures following advice that contradicts with the narrative they've been telling themselves. Like that's how that works. Okay. So, all right. Thank you for that one. And reach out to me if anybody has any questions after the fact. I know this was kind of quick, so I'm going to quickly go through this so I don't have any, nothing else, goes wrong here. So 3 things you can do now: balance your compassion and accountability, follow the tips that were on here. Okay. Reach out to me and ask me. I have to give out individual codes. I would have just put up one code if I could have done that. But if you want to download Pain Rebel for free, or if you want to send that code to someone else who can do the same, reach out to me and I can absolutely help you. And the third thing, and just reach out to one another. If you have people on the call that you know, or outside the call, remember what I said about we get through this together. But the third thing, and that relates to all of it, is be kind, be curious, okay? And be the light. So with that, thank you guys very much for coming. I would love to talk with you further. So like I said, please reach out to me. My email's broken today, so if I don't get right back to you, please be patient, but text me, call me, email me, message me, and I will get you that free code. So thank you.
Thank you.